virus and not the Health and Human Services or the NIH or the FDA or the CDC or anyone else. And that indicates that they were aware and knew that this was and treated this as a biological attack from the very beginning.
Right. Yeah. And so, I'm going to be careful with my words. I don't want to make any direct accusations to my chain of command that could potentially get me in some trouble, nor do I really know the full picture. But here's what I do know, and that's what I want to share with you guys, is the information that I do know and the consequences of that. And so I've worked with a number of these vaccine injured, and what I've learned in the process is that it's alarming to see how many vaccine injured service members I'm finding constantly. Like, it's just about every day now, someone contacts me and says, I have this vaccine injured service member. Can you help them out? And it's growing, sometimes 2 or 3 a day. And these individuals are experiencing terrifying consequences that aren't just cardiac, but nervous systems, and everything else. And I'm not a doctor, so I'm not an expert in that. I just present the facts. But nonetheless, it's a massive national security issue to see the complications of this vaccine and know that the military generally in the military health system has not acknowledged that it's from the vaccine. In fact, they're outwardly hostile to injured service members who try to get a doctor in the military system to admit that it's from the vaccine. I've seen issues with reporting on VAERS. We've tracked that in the vaccine injury report that we've submitted to Congress with my team and I, where service members have tried to put their injuries into VAERS, but their doctors won't let them. So they have to go to outside doctors in order to get medical help at their own expense, as well as actually get it on paper that this is from the vaccine. And so that's pretty concerning. I wouldn't really call it a cover up, but it smells a little bit like that in terms of the coordination that I see with that. And on top of that, so the issues, primarily cardiac, are extremely concerning for the flying community. So I'll wrap this up by just kind of giving you guys a little bit of an anecdote. And I want people to kind of imagine that they're strapped into an F-16 doing the Top Gun thing. You're a 2-ship of F-16s. You're out there in the airspace and you're doing some training for air-to-air combat. And so you line up behind your opponent and you set up for a strike on them, and you're about to fire off the missile, and all of a sudden his aircraft just starts pointing towards the ground. And you say, Viper 1, recovered. Nothing. He keeps getting faster, going towards the ground. Viper 1, recover. You're screaming on the radio. You're telling him to wake up. And that $30 million airplane with someone's husband, someone's father, someone's son or daughter crashes into the ground, and we lose that military asset, 2 military assets, the aircraft and the highly valuable pilot. And so it's completely insane that we've given this experimental vaccine to service members that we don't know the consequences of. It's completely unprecedented. It's a gene therapy, excuse me. It's not really a vaccine. And that's a national security issue in and of itself. And now you tie it into things like, maybe potentially Chinese components going into this, the effects of the NIH, the foreign contacts that were involved in creating this vaccine. And we have something that, for as much as we harp on national, to bring awareness to that. And so if you want, check out my page. I've got a lot of information about vaccine injured service members, and I can, of course, answer some questions as well.
What's your page? Can you tell us, please?
Yeah, my Twitter handle is at John A. Bose 3.
At John A. B-O-S-E and the number 3?
B-O-W-E-S, the number 3.
Okay. B-O-W-E-S, Bose, and the number 3. Okay, so if anyone wants to get in touch with John, you can find him at John A. Bose, John A, the letter A, B-O-W-E-S, and the number 3 on Twitter. Are you on anywhere else, John? John, are you on anywhere else?
No, I'm not.
Okay. So, well, have there been any incidents like that where their pilot has been behind the, I was going to say the wheel, but that's not exactly right, behind the controls, or are you speaking theoretically about what can happen?
Right now I'm speaking theoretically, but I'll give you 2 anecdotes. So I just started speaking with 2 vaccine injured service members who were in pilot training who are getting medically discharged from the military now. They're young guys in their early 20s, just brand new lieutenants. And they are being removed because one of them woke up in the middle of the night with severe chest pains. Who have woken up in the middle of the night with heart issues. That A-10 pilot who was diagnosed with pericarditis later, but it's only a matter of time before we see an incident in the cockpit. And so I think just recently, I think this week or last week, a pilot had a cardiac arrest shortly after landing, an airline pilot. And so whether or not there are cardiac events that have happened in the military in terms of aviation, that's very hard to say because our safety investigations are kept privileged. They're privileged information, so we don't really know. And the general public would probably never know whether or not it was tied to a cardiac event. So it's difficult information to present. I can really only present hypothetical happened. And it's probably going to happen.
I have a question for John.
Okay.
So just that you're working on, or is there something that's possible to get ahead of the issue? Do you have anything for that potentially?
Yeah, I think we need to be doing cardiac screenings for our pilots. And I think that's one of those things where, as a pilot, I have to tell my flight doctor what kind of protein powder I'm taking. Like, they screen everything we put in our bodies for safety, to make sure that we are safe and healthy to fly. And so it seems to me that it would be ludicrous, knowing the information we know now about the safety of the vaccine, not to protect our pilots. If we're so serious about it, then why aren't we serious about this? Because we've certainly started investigations for things much less than this. And I think the protein powder example is probably an extreme example, but nonetheless, like, we have restrictions, severe restrictions on what we can put in our bodies before we fly, in terms of like Tylenol and everything else. Like, there's very few things we can take before we fly. So nonetheless, I think right now we need to be making calls to mitigate them early, so we don't have later complications down the road that create even more of a national security crisis, because we're already grossly short on pilots right now. And in the military in general, we're short on service members.
And can you describe when you get these calls every day, I know you said sometimes it's the nervous system, but what are the other things that you're hearing? Maybe some of the doctors on the call have some experience of this.
Yeah, sure. So we've got a couple. Some of them are non-pilots. So one of them, I think a pretty extreme example, is a 39-year-old master sergeant who had 4 strokes, I think the day after getting the vaccine. It might have been the day of. I'll have to check the report. But we've seen strokes. We have seen Guillain-Barré syndrome. We have seen a lot of cardiac pericarditis, myocarditis. We've seen nervous issues. And along with a number of other kind of strange, undiagnosable issues. I think the most severe one, you might have heard of her, Carolina Stancic. I've been working with her. She had 2 heart attacks on top of strange cancers. I've heard of a lot of pilots developing weird ocular cancers, and other strange testicular cancer is another common one that seems to be increasing. And that's just word of mouth. That's not really documented anywhere. I wish it was. But just talking to people on the street, they're saying, like, yeah, like my unit of Osprey CV-22s, we've had 4 incidences of cancer like this year in our squadron. So that's pretty unheard of and unprecedented in the flying community, to hear things like that.
Can I chime in a little bit on this?
Absolutely.
I was going to say, you expect to get the myocarditis, you expect some of these other things that are common, but people are completely glossing over the fact that this vaccine has a way of turning off your cancer surveillance. And we are going to see more cancers. We're going to see them in a younger population. We're going to see them more aggressive because they're not, upon diagnosis, they'll be staged much later than normal. And no, it's not because of the lockdowns, because that's what they keep trying to blame it on, but that is long since done. It is the vaccines, and very few physicians are making that connection. And you had mentioned, John, the need for screening, and that's another problem, because EKG, ECGs aren't seeing these subclinical myocarditises. You have to have a cardiac MRI with gadolinium contrast to be able to see the inflammation that's occurring. And subclinical is just as dangerous as fulminant, because especially for pilots, when they have adrenaline rushes and when they have all of these things that can trigger an arrhythmia, you have to know if that pilot has subclinical myocarditis. And that's the only way to detect it. And I promise you, they're not going to be shelling out that kind of money to do something that invasive.
Absolutely no chance. And to speak to your cancer comment too, fighter pilots in a 2001 study were shown to have a 30% more likely possibility of developing testicular cancer. And that's largely due to the insane amount of radiation that we're subjected to in our aircraft. And so that's a factor too to look out for. But you're right, it's very hard to screen for myocarditis. And so, I'm speaking in very broad senses. I would certainly think that Congress needs to if they're going to act on this, address this with medical doctors and not people like me. But nonetheless, yeah, you're right. There's not going to be MRIs or anything else like that, but we can do what we can in terms of at least looking out for clotting too. I think that's probably a factor with D-dimer tests and other things like that. But nonetheless, there needs to be some sort of effort to start looking at people and figuring it out, and at least developing protocols for service members to potentially help themselves if they're starting to see issues. Because right.
Sure, I would love to hear from Pete and Dave to weigh in on what John is saying, but go ahead.
Thanks, Laura. You do an excellent job with journalistic integrity. My other physician colleagues that have been on have been well spoken, and the last gentleman speaking about the military. Many things that I do, I've been on top of this COVID thing for the last 3 years, or I've been on top of early treatment, been on top of questioning, and then being more than concerned and wanting the mRNA and DNA pulled off the market for because I thought it should be done. And especially with all that's going on with pericarditis and all of the arrhythmia issues. I mean, we're watching it on television. I mean, with 24-year-old football players in the greatest of health that have been screened yearly for at least 8 years, high school and college, and then in the pros, having this happen. I can't imagine people flying airplanes. You know, we can't protect them as much as we protect truck drivers. It doesn't make any sense. And when I try to bring it up to the FAA folks, they're just cold at best and hostile at worst. And it needs to change immediately.
Wow. It's pretty staggering. Can you say your name again for us, please, to make sure?
Yeah, Dr. Craig Wax. I'm on Twitter, back on Twitter, I should say, after a hiatus, being kicked off Twitter. Dr. Craigwax, and I've been on top of this. As I said, I'm with AAPS, the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, out of Tucson, Arizona, as well as Global COVID Summit, along with Dr. Lynn Finn, etc., and Dr. Ryan Cole, which I'm proud to be associated with.
That's great. Thank you so much. I just want to give Brooke a chance because I know since she joined us, we haven't heard from her. Brooke, you want to weigh in here and introduce yourself to everybody?
Sure. Hi, Lara. Thank you. And thank you, Lindsay, for inviting me on. My name is Brooke Jackson, and in 2020, I contacted the FDA after seeing the phase 3 clinical trials just being handled very inappropriately. Just egregious misconduct in the conduct of the study. And I guess I've spent the last several years just really trying to understand what I wanted to piggyback on what David was saying about, you know, with regard to kind of what I call the congressional milestones that have really laid the foundation and given, in my mind, pathways to what's been allowed to happen. And I think, you know, ultimately that it's criminal, what's been allowed to happen. But, you know, going back to 2001 and 2002 with the Bioterrorism Act, I mean, there's so many things that have happened in between, like the prescription user fees, the PDUFA fees, that kind of, I think, help perpetuate the revolving door and allow, you know, Pfizer and Moderna and these different pharma companies to have a real say in, one, how quickly their drugs get to market. So David's exactly right. But there's so much that's happened in between there. And, you know,
without following the law, they know everything that we've discussed and they know a lot more. So what is really the purpose here?
I guess that's kind of my point is that they've been allowed to, through these statutes, through these laws, these regulations, to kind of build their pathway to make it almost what appears to be, it's criminal, it's scary. I worry about my children, what I'm seeing funneled down now into and that's really going to be with the help of our politicians. That's why I'm so kind of in their face almost because I've been to, Capitol Hill. I've listened to these doctors calling for a stop to these products that are hurting people. They're injuring people, and I just feel like they can do more. It's great to give them a platform and an opportunity to speak, but what else can you do? And so that's really been my focus
So do
recently.
you think these were real clinical trials?
So I can tell you that for Pfizer's clinical trial, and NPs to help with just managing the trial. So that was a huge problem, and really my point in so yes, they were real clinical trials, but they weren't managed the way that I've ever seen a trial managed in all my 20 years. And while a lot of that spent in a director level type position, I still was in clinic. I still, watched my staff and ensured that they were doing what they were to do. And I imagine if what I saw at my clinic was going on, I'm sure it was happening. It begged the question, right? Was this happening elsewhere? And that's why I took, I guess what I didn't realize at the time was the huge risk in calling the FDA or Pfizer directly first, then FDA, and it cost me my job. But I mean, I would do it over in a heartbeat. I mean, I've spent my career helping big pharma get their products to market. And that's scary because I wonder what else did what did I help get there?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Pete and Dave, or even Ryan, do any of you want to jump in on what John was talking about?
Yeah, if you guys. Okay, sorry, Mike was getting stuck with the mic. Yeah, if you don't mind, well, I just wanted to say that I've known John actually now for throughout the entire pandemic or throughout the mandate. What John does is amazing because John is looking forward, right? John is trying to find. I'm looking back, looking at the history, looking at. Are being abused right now. The fast tracking of vaccines, the mandating of unlicensed drugs. Any of the pandemic exercises, they talk